I'll start by welcoming everyone to the Mount Gretna School of Arts lecture series hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. I also want to thank Vincent Strout for sponsoring the lecture series this year, and Purpose One for being one of our corporate sponsors for the summer. A little introduction about Mount Gretna School of Art if you don't know about it. We started about 10 years ago to be a 7-week intensive pressure cooker, kind of niche-based school. It's all about connecting students with nature, which they say doesn't happen enough anymore, and the tradition of seeing and painting, and also teaching students about their sensory intelligence and how that folds into art making. The school is also, all about our kind of an equity-based scholarship system, which we're pretty proud of, which qualifies us as a purely public charity in Pennsylvania, which is more special than regular public charity, in my opinion. So we're really proud of that. We've been able to pull that off, even from the very first year. And our connection to the community here is important, which we see these lectures as a kind of symbiotic thing. The ability to share them with the general Mount Gretna community that's here today. And now, thanks to a lot of academic technology training that was thrust upon me, we have an online audience. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ryan Strochinsky, who was an alumni here in 2016, one of our painting students, and also attended Chautauqua. Before I delve too much into him, I remembered one more thing. These two artists, Sarah Ransohoff and Ryan Strochinsky, they are both 4 Pillars artists in residence. So we thought of this idea because, what's going to happen when our students take our core program and then maybe move through to our studios? Will we ever see them again? What more could we do for them? So we came up with this residency as a way to help them in their early careers, reconnect with our audience, and then we do try to get them a show. And we also admit 1, 2, or 3 other artists that maybe are new to Mount Gretna each year. So about the 4 Pillars artists are alumni, and about half of them are new to Mount Gretna. And some of the ones that are new, they've heard about Mount Gretna School of Art and thought it was cool for years. And then, this is something I could sort of fit into, but they're not students anymore necessarily. Back to Ryan. He got his MFA from MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, and his BFA from the University of Cincinnati, where he now lives, if my understanding is correct. He's had some shows at the Welcome Project in Cincinnati, Space Scribbles online in 2020, because that's what they were doing in 2020. It was online. Broadmead, and also Lee Gallery in Maryland. And I'd like to welcome him to the stage, and we'll get his lapel mic on.
Hello. Really nice to be here. I'm mostly going to talk about my work over the past 4 years. And for me, it's a lot easier to reflect on the work that I have some distance from. So this is a painting I made when I first got to graduate school. So that would have been 4 years ago. And for those of you in the program, it would have been 2 years after I was a student at my graduate school. And I suppose the brief and the skinny would be that I make small, earnest, abstract paintings that are mostly about myself, but hopefully for the way I feel, which I think that's hopefully though, right, the way I feel. And I tend to work pretty small. I think this is about a foot tall. They're kind of the size of a textbook. Okay, so now I will talk about an artist that I was thinking about, or that were important to me when I first got to grade school. So this is a painting by the artist Forrest Best. And Forrest West also works really small, and he would make these, I guess you would describe them as like the idiosyncratic paintings that came out of these dreams. He would work from his dreams, and he had a sort of lexicon of symbols that had to do with, I don't know, spiritual or mystical ideas that he had. I think these paintings appealed to me, one, because they had a lot of clarity, which I felt like my work didn't have a lot of clarity. These things have a lot of force, especially when you see them in person. They almost have like small sigils on the wall that sort of emanate this power. And also, there's something a little crude about them, certainly in the frame, that I think just appealed to my sensibility. And also, this kind of antithetical to the dreams. I think that was interesting, that, you know, they're very physical and they're coming from this more element. And then this is another artist that I was thinking about when I first got to grad school. So this is a painting by Agnes Martin. And this one's actually larger. Maybe it's like a 5-foot painting or something like that. Similar to Forrest West in a lot of ways, and very different in a lot of ways. So again, there's a lot of clarity in the composition of this painting. In this case, the shapes aren't so idiosyncratic, right? It's just squares. But there's an austerity to it and a simplicity where it seems to cut through reality to something that's, I don't know, more ideal or even more beautiful. This painting is called Weeds. So I guess you could think of it relating back to the physical world in this way. And her writing was also very influential to me at the time. So I will now read a quote from an essay she wrote. Beauty is the mystery of life. It is not in the eye, it is in the mind. In our mind, there is an awareness of beauty. So I guess it's sort of a Platonic idea, but interestingly, Agnes Martin and Forrest West were actually born a year apart, and they were both sort of outsiders, sort of insiders, which I kind of liked. I don't know if you would consider her a visionary or not, but there's a video of her where she's sitting in a chair and she says, I do not paint until inspiration strikes or something. So I'm not a visionary. I wish I was, but I work pretty hard for the compositions, and I don't see anything before I paint. I don't really like to do preliminary drawings or anything. I just like to figure it out on the thing. And it's not really interesting to me unless I surprise myself or I discover something. So if I do have an idea, I don't have to get through it. You know, the ideas are sometimes unfinished, although I suppose you need some sort of starting point for structure. In this particular painting, I think you can see maybe how I was inspired some by the palette of that painting of Agnes Martin. I think the bottom of this painting was totally an invention, right? So that was my idea of these sort of radial things, and the top I was probably looking at another painting, although I'm not sure what it was. And I was definitely trying to make things that I thought were beautiful, but then I was also reading Dostoevsky at the time, and I just read the biography of Dorothy Day, who started the Catholic Workers Movement. And my mind was very much in the realm of I think I was conflating aesthetics and morals in a way. So Dostoevsky quote is, the world will be saved by beauty. But it was important to me that they were tender or compassionate or something like that, which I think is why I wanted to keep tender passages, and then also very, I don't know if people read Dostoevsky, but it's very human characters, right? Very flawed characters, and the paint had to do that thing too. This one's a bit larger. This is, I don't know, like 4 feet. It might be hard to see, but at this point in time, I really don't have the things that I learned at Mount Gretna, especially with drawing. I felt like I hadn't really been taught how to draw, and I felt like I came from there. So these paints I say I don't have a preliminary drawing, but I would draw on the substrate and then wipe the drawing back and put up these other paints. At the time, I was really, for whatever reason, I couldn't make a painting without like a framing element, condensing the energy or something like that. And I guess another thing about my particular ideas about beauty at this time was that for some reason everything was sort of elegiac, like it had this sort of center void or was mournful or something in a way. But I suppose it has something to do with like, I don't know, disenchantment or just a general feeling of loss or absence seems to be something I'm interested in. Yeah, and I suppose I'm also trying to get the composition more effective. That's been like a goal of mine at this point. Okay, so then my paintings, I suppose at the start, I felt like were more pictorial, and I wanted them to be realized with the material more. So I started experimenting more with mediums and pigments, and modeling my own paint and trying to get certain surfaces and textures. I would paint indirectly more often, layering paints. And I guess in a way I started to get further away from drawing. These things became my interest. I guess that also follows from trying to make these more productive compositions. So in a way, they're more designed, but I would try to complicate them. I suppose in this one, you can see that there's this shimmery and sort of messier thing in the background with that geometric shape overlaid on top of it. And that's a strategy I would employ a lot. These paintings are actually pretty hard to photograph too. So that's like a interference paint that looks gold under certain lights, but transparent under other lights. And the gray is graphite, so it has a metallic quality. The top right corner was painted up in thick layers of paint mixed with wax and the foam. So it's got a sort of density but transparency to it. Maybe there's something about like going back to the Ignace Martin idea of beauty in the mind. There's something about a dichotomy between like the way we think about things, the way we conceive things, and I would try to say, oh, but look, here's something that's more phenomenal. The primary color thing will show up in my paintings a lot. They're probably grabbed from like, I like Mondrian, but that's a little different than Mondrian maybe, or like art of the counterculture, the late 60s, like psychedelic art. I think I was relating to it, even though I'm not particularly into psychedelics. I think Mondrian maybe it was about like purity. These are the building blocks, or something about maybe like just innocence or playfulness, childhood. Okay, yeah. Again, this one you really can't photograph it because so much of what I was trying to do was create a surface that had atmosphere and depth, and just doing that really through like. Just doing that through the quality of the surface and the way colors overlay. But again, I had to offset it with something that felt like more rational or more like logical, and the sort of color spectrum. This is the way we experience color. And then behind it, it's like, this is the thing you can't experience, or you can experience, but you can't articulate that the ineffable. And then this is now we're in COVID territory, and we can't go to our studios. And I was in Baltimore at grad school, so I ended up moving at that time to my grandma's house in Florida because it seemed like a better place to be quarantined than Baltimore. And although I love Baltimore, it's just it's a city, and I want to get out of the city. And you can see here I really do reduce things, and I totally kind of threw the drawing out the window, and I just thought, okay, here's a composition that I like. Okay, I guess that central void that I mentioned earlier, so like the space that's designated by those four circles, and then a sort of I view the bottom plane as a ground plane, but in a sort of broken perspective or a sort of flattened perspective. And of course, the bottom is very flat, and I'm trying to make the top again have that sort of that through atmosphere, through surface. These are another ones that I think they look a lot different in person. And I just played with that motif because I realized that I wasn't so interested in composition at that time. If I had one composition that was okay, good enough, I could play with the color and be satisfied. Color and surface application. This is a sort of like a joke on the previous one. So it's like, okay, I can shift everything to the right. And it's experimenting with the shape of the panel as another sort of rhetorical device. Okay, so I was making those paintings during this COVID time, and then I got back to school, and they were critiqued. And at first, people really liked them. And I wasn't sure what to do with them. Okay, people like these things, they don't know where to go. And then I had one critic, Fox Heisen, who said, it was quite a harshest critique I got at grad school. She said the paintings were both twee, as in cubes, and she said they were impenetrable. And I knew what she meant, which is why it was such like a affecting critique. I felt kind of trapped, and I didn't like that, so I thought I had to shift and try something new. So I started working on paper. The oil paintings were built up in these thick layers, and in a way I felt like, I don't know, like the surface was suffocated, like the air was really dense. So maybe I thought, this will be liberating. And I suppose you could say, right, it was getting closer to summer at this point, and people were tired of being indoors. So maybe there's also a need for a sort of air, lightness, or freedom and capacity. So I would make these things on paper, and I would try to give myself as much freedom as possible. I mentioned in the beginning that I had a particular idea of beauty that came from love or compassion or something. I realized that I maybe wasn't giving myself enough room for other things like awkwardness or anger or shame or any other thing. Not that everything needs to be in the painting, but I felt like it was important at this time to give myself space for those things. Right, so this sort of, like I would have never allowed myself to make something this gestural in oil paint because I would have thought, oh, that's too. And a lot of these are painted on the back side of the page and just flip it around or cut them up. And you can kind of see this one has a crease in the center where it was cut and reconstructed. Yeah, I guess I just got weird. This was made from a ladder that I bought. This is like 14 inches, maybe somewhere between a foot and 2 feet. I thought the paper was really beautiful. And I thought, okay, I could do something with the paper that just totally implies space, and then the coffin acts as a sort of framing of it. I was making these coffins for a long time before I came to grad school. And I suppose at first it was like, I needed a geometric form that was figurative. And these were like scraps from larger ones, and I thought they were just, I suppose now I'm trying to make things that are more delicate, and I thought the color, the way the paper held color. So these are a combination of dyes, and this is another. So these are the coffins that I made years before. And at first I was going to make this large painting. So this is maybe like 5.5 feet long or something. I guess I was inspired a little bit by the artist Mike Cloud, who makes these shapes. I made the thing. It was really hard to make. And I thought, well, actually, that's rather beautiful. And I'm not sure stretching something on top of this will make it better. So then I just decided that the stretcher itself would be my substrate. And this was pretty different from the paintings I was making before. I made those drawings, right? Because, well, not only is it on a large shaped thing, but it's far more gestural, and the color is a lot louder. I think it's pretty ugly in a lot of ways, but that's probably why it's better. Awesome. Okay, so now I graduate from graduate school in Baltimore, so I'm no longer in Baltimore. And my partner at the time really wanted to live next to the National Gallery of Art, so we moved to DC. as close to the National Gallery of Art as we could. And I guess I'll now talk about the ways in which my work changed as a result of living in DC. So first, starting at the National Gallery of Art. This is in the American wing, the outsider art section. So that was, I suppose, where I spend most of my time in the museum. That's the thing that interested me the most. And this is a work by James Hampton called Thrones of the Third Heaven of the Muslim Millennium General Assembly. I actually don't know too much about why he made these things. He had these visions or some sort of prophetic idea about Jesus coming back or something for their time. That wasn't really what interested me. It's just you would take this furniture and combine them, bind bits of furniture together and then cover them in silver and gold foil. And the beautiful thing is I was able to elevate this everyday thing to fit his sort of prophetic needs via the very simple use of foil. It also made me think of sort of color in a different way because it's very symbolic in the way that he's signaling divinity via the use of gold or silver. And that alone is enough for you to understand, like, oh yeah, this isn't about furniture, this is about the divine or other worlds. And this is in the same room. This is by an artist named Emery Blagden from 1986. And he had built this large healing machine in his barn. And you can imagine maybe a room like this room, but there's copper wires everywhere and paintings everywhere. And he would move these things in accordance to the positions of the stars. And again, I spoke myself at the very beginning of like a completion of aesthetics and morals, and the world would be saved by beauty. I love the human scale of art, and that it's a pretty it's not like a very powerful thing, right? Like if you want to change the world, you don't make paintings, but I like the naive idea that you could and just sort of take. So I like that he wasn't a doctor or a politician. He was just an artist in his farm. So then this is the work I was making at that time. So you can kind of see it's like staple paper like earlier. This is actually paper, aluminum, and lead. Yeah, there's a lot going. So in grad school, right, you can spend a lot of time in your studio and you're kind of like in your tower, isolated from the world. Then in DC, I'm walking through the streets a lot more. And we live by the National Gallery of Art, so there's all these white neoclassical buildings. And then, right, but also like in the shadow of these monuments, there's homeless and these sort of things that these sort of woundedness or something is what I felt like I saw in the streets. And then this is the other place I'd like to spend my time in the National Gallery of Art, which is in the medieval section. And again, this thing is beautiful because this is called, by the way, the Angel of Annunciation, 1330. The way that gold was on there, it felt like a crust, which was really beautiful, or like a scan. But really, I find that like looking at art where the person is sensitive to the possibility of other worlds or something like that. Like I realized that for me, it's these earlier things that are the most that I can look at the longest, and I try to entertain the minds of the people who make them on the outskirts. And I thought the color in these were very beautiful. They're painted tempera, so it's a slightly different quality than other things. And that's my rendition. At this point, I'm experimenting more with mark making too, so I realized I could think in shapes, and I wanted to think more mark. I realized it's like using a brush. I was like very self-conscious, so I started stamping color, and you can see how the color on this one is kind of influenced by the sort of medieval art. It was like this big, And again, it's like a foot wide. This was painted on top of the print of an El Greco painting, so it's paper on a wood sculpture. This is like very recent. Well, I worked on this thing for like the last 2 years. It's probably was too long. That's a work in progress with the same one that illustrates this sort of thing. And maybe it was probably sure. More things I'm working on. This one, it was too much of a cross, so I eventually cut it down. But this is on the easel right now in Cincinnati, probably inspired by calligraphy or something. Also on the easel right now. And this is my attempt to work on larger ones. I guess the thing I realized is the larger a painting is, the more sculptural, I guess, my tendency is. Right? For whatever reason, when they're get large, for me, they can't just be about pictorial space. They have to have some sort of felt, maybe because they're closer to like a human or something, some sort of felt material presence.
So I'm going to introduce Sarah Ransohoff, who is our second four pillar. It's going to talk here for about 20 more minutes. She attended the University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and studied illustration and cartooning at the School of Visual Arts in New York, with some illustrations appearing in the New Yorker after she graduated. She's attended the Aegean Center for the Fine Arts, and including residency with Jane Peck. More recently, kind of had a week-long residency, which I'm jealous of, at Fairfield Porter's family home in Maine. And so as she steps up, I'm going to do double duty and get the slide projector going.
Yeah, yay. Thank you so much, Jay. Ryan, love to talk. So happy to be here. Would love to come back as a student. I love being a student. Okay, so all right, I thought it'd be helpful to start with now and then we can go back. Yeah, I guess I would say I'm interested in space, nature, being present with the thing, noticing and honoring what's maybe being left over. I was in my anxious sleep last night. I was reading about this. And it's like holding a bird. Sort of like that precious moment of like this thing that's so delicate and exciting and trying to sort of be with it before it goes away. Okay, so who am I? I'm in my mid-30s, say that for the Q&A. I grew up in Chautauqua, North Carolina. My dad's a doctor, mom's a chef, but I share these things just because I feel like, you know, I do lots of things and I feel like I grew up with a family that was super left brain and super right brain and super thoughtful and super creative. So just sort of naturally, I think I combine lots of things into my life. Early influences, this is sort of the smorgasbord that this red woman, she's still in our kitchen by Alice Katz, not the original, of course, but very well. Who doesn't like Alice Katz? This Matisse print was also in the home. Love these cartoons, Archie comics, if anyone's into that. And Andrew Wyatt, I mean, boy, oh boy, I mean, he and his father are just, I don't know what to say about them. I just have so much admiration for their dedication to the craft. So in college, I read Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, fell in love with the ideas of improv. Right. Okay. So we're a house team, performed once a week in New York City. This was an indie team that I love. But basically, what I loved about improv is the philosophy of it all, the collective creation, the growing and playing together to joyful social creative fun, just like social creativity. So I started painting scenarios that made me laugh, went to the New Yorker, pitched it and got a shot, which was exciting. I think my inclination here is for visual comedy or satire is more in the shop world rather than the cartoon world. I had one in the back that was very exciting and affirming, but it's a ton of work for a lot of projection, and I think it's not currently where my leanings are. But I do like the more narrative, playful observations of daily shots. So it's more where I lean and I submit occasionally. It's fun. It's fun to get to share your art with the world. So I have two people who have been really important to me. One is Marcia Bird. I worked for a gallery for a summer in 2010. And then I lived with her for 2 months during the pandemic. While I worked remotely, and in the afternoons I would paint and get input from her. And she's amazing. So she works in acrylic. She's a West Coast artist. She is the best colorist that I know. I mean, she just, what do I have to say about her? She can see and translate color in a way that is so celebratory, loving, and truthful. She really is just, she goes out and she looks for hours, and she's done this whole life. So she just like understands how light falls and how to celebrate it through painting. And she said, the more you paint, the more you begin to see beautiful things all around you. And I think she's right about something I think about a lot. So with her, I began to think, these are my ideas, with her, I began to think about the yin and yang of painting, how we need the dark to see the light, the calm to find the excitement. We talked about how there's like the beauty and the specificity, which kind of got into improv. One of the things that I love about these kinds of art forms is that they all reinforce each other, you know. In improv, you want to be as specific as possible. You know, you have a name, you have a relationship, you have a place. And that specificity is what makes the character relatable or exciting. In the same way, it's like the specificity of the trees in the background of this cow, and the specificity of these flowers in this moment and the shape that they create are what make it relatable. She also taught me a lot about writing in color rather than white, which is a work in progress. It always will be. Use less white. Jane is the other important teacher in my life. So I studied with her for 6 months in college and then 3 months last year. She and her husband moved to Greece in the 90s just to make a teach art. She doesn't have a website presence. I'm sure. In my mind, she's sort of a Hilma Oprint person type where she just makes art because she loves making art, and maybe later we'll find her work and be like, yeah, this one. But so these paintings are about a decade old. It's impossible to get her to sell or share her art. But she is beyond being the best teacher I've ever worked with in any discipline. Two big things she taught me was to be gentle to our creation and to let the piece show you what it's trying to say. One thing we worked on was creation based on blurry inputs, which for me, as a mostly observational worker, is really fruitful. So every morning, while I was there, these two on the left, for instance, I would spend 30 to 60 minutes doing a coffee drawing, which basically you make a Turkish coffee, you drain the cup, look at the bottom of the cup, and just sort of let it go from there. And what was so fun and fruitful about this practice for me was that I'm used to observational work, and it's allowed for a bit more play and sort of like the game where you look at clouds and you're like, what does that cloud look like to you? But in this process, it was a bit of yes and, which is, if you're familiar, you know, the foundational tenet of improv, where you build off of something that's there and there are no mistakes and you just keep going. Yeah, I also showed a self-portrait here because I think we did work in portraiture, but I think that the line work that I got to practice with the coffee drawings extend to some of the way that I expressed things here. And then we also talked about Japanese art and Zen influences. So I have a dedicated yoga practice and a regular meditation practice, but I admire the teachings of Zen Buddhism and the art, both visual and written, like through humor, comedy, or the book of Forward Emptiness by Ruth Zaki. Great book, I recommend it. So basically, you use space to balance the creativity and rest. So on the top left, we did like an Enso practice, which was interesting. These two images here are just examples of what I love, where, you know, the space is as important as the form. I think another thing that I like about this is that it's sort of like in a world where we very much feel the need to like say and do a lot. I feel like these pieces of art also allow us to do less and have it still be meaningful. I also just love these two books. Books have been really important for me since I don't have an MFA, just in a way of self-teaching. So I highly recommend both of these books. So this piece was from a series of prints. I did a drawing of roses that I then made into prints, and the prints they didn't super work out. So then I was like, how can I still work with this piece? And so I did watercolors on each of them. And I think this was the most successful one. And I think what I like about it is it's me attempting to translate the learnings from the previous slide, this idea of non-negative space, and this emptiness sort of let the viewer fill it in and just, I don't know, I just like breathing her basically. I also adored Morandi. I think one of the things that I loved about him is that he didn't try to reinvent the wheel sort of the same way. I guess that I was just thinking about negative space. It's just like there's so much beauty in these simple everyday objects, and he saw endless possibility in how we might arrange them. There's something sort of like peaceful and curious and loving about the way that he approached painting that I think I would love to be able to do. Okay, great. So I went to Art Week. It was amazing. Truly top 5 life experiences. I learned about Camilla Talbot. Holy moly. I kind of was blown away. So I basically had done a lot of watercolors in my life, but I've never done, I don't know. There's something about the way that she thought in shapes, or she thinks in shapes. She leaves the white of the paper. She's playful with her colors, and also she works big, and I've never done that before. And one of the great things about a community of artists is that people have different materials, and they'll share materials with you. There's a woman there, Peggy, shared with me her big watercolor paper. So these are 18 by 24. And I was like, I'm going to channel my inner Camilla. And I just freaking loved it. I just felt so playful. It felt bold. Working with a bigger brush, I tend to work pretty small. So this felt sort of like scary and exciting to me. And I think also what was nice was, nature is so complex, and there's so much information there. And I think as someone who tends to be very tied to reality when it comes to art, it's helpful to remember that you're not going to capture everything. The goal is not to capture everything. So I think it was fun to let myself feel a little free from the necessity to capture everything, especially on a bigger piece of canvas where the idea of capturing everything there also gets more intimidating, whereas smaller thing and feel more like, okay, well, reasonably, I could kind of be able to do this. So anyway, very fun play there. Let's see. Okay. And then now I'm off the island. But from the large watercolors and the idea of negative space and sort of like also the longer canvases that you tend to find in nation art, I built up that size and shape. And what I like about these is, and what I notice about both of them is like, they both, in America, we read left to right. And so I think I also like, there's like an opening on the left that allows you to enter more so on the top one. But I don't know, we were talking about drawing, and it's just such, it's so immediate. You just, it's a way of seeing, and I just started being present. It's a meditation, basically. So anyway, then I went to Oaxaca, and it was rainy season, and Oaxaca is a city, and I don't love setting up to work in front of other people, in front of lots of people, like in a city, and so it was rainy, so I've done a lot of studio and inside work, and I think it was interesting to see these kinds of pieces come out because, as you've probably seen, I'm not sure if it's not entirely true, but I tend to enjoy nature more so than other things. And so I was curious to find that I actually was quite interested in these spaces. And I also think it's interesting when I look at them, there is like an element of emptiness with sort of like condensed activity. Oh, I'm using the red pointer. So here, we can't really see it because it kind of doesn't photograph well, but there's like this mysterious plants in the background, which I don't know. I mean, I feel like as a person, I I'm a bit more playful than I think my artwork can communicate. And I'm trying to add, and I also am aware that art will not capture every side of every person. No one piece to be like, this is who they are. But I'm like, these are so, why so serious? So then I went back to New York for 5 months. I was living with 2 of my friends while I was looking for a job in an apartment, did more interiors for the same reason. And I'm working on these gorilla boards, or they're called gorilla boards, but they're basically like just carton and you can sort of build them like building blocks. So that's something that I enjoyed. So for instance, I'll use it again. So this one I started, it was just that left panel. And then it felt like kind of close your eyes, walk up one of them. It's so condensed. I mean, where's that's like a chaotic scene. So then I added another panel and extended it. And that was such an exciting discovery and such a fun play. And also something I learned is walls are hard. It's like they're white walls, but they're not white. They're 1,000 colors, at least to me. And I think what's interesting too is that I can see the learnings from Marcia in these paintings because, she's such a colorist. And so it was like, well, something's not just this color. What are the many things that you're seeing there? So, a note on performance and expression. So this is Kate Berlia and this is Bill Burnham. Bill Burnham has a special called Inside the Season Smile. It's an amazing special. He also directed this show by Kate Berlia, who's a comedian in New York City. That show, so first of all, Inside, amazing. It's amazing. I love him and I love his work. And then Kate Berlia, me and been following for a while, and she directed the show that she did in New York. And the thing that was beautiful about it was like so many shows in New York are like, it's sort of like a mill and you like go to your seat and everything. It's like the show hasn't started until the show starts. And what was amazing about her show is that the entire thing was the show. Mm-hmm. You go in and she's made it sort of like a gallery. And when you're walking to your seat, there's like 2 different exhibitions there. And it was just so playful and delightful. And I kind of channeled it into, this is like, it's not a very good slide, but I made this website when I got a job after 5 months, which was exhausting. It was the most productive, unproductive thing I've done. And I basically turned my apartment into a gallery when I had the party, and it was amazing. It was just, it just was so fun, and I kind of love the idea. I mean, I have performance, and I have visual, and I have a deep desire for more community in the world of art. And so this was very fun with you. Anyway, so back to the now. This is a work in progress, I think, but something that I've been, and this is again the grill board, so I lengthened it out. The things that I'm thinking of are finding shapes in the non-shapes. These are 3 artists that I'm thinking about now, who are looking at nature and find shapes and sort of emphasize and yes, and those shapes in a way that I would love to be able to do. Oh yeah, and then something is a work in progress. Something that I've also been noticing is that I tend to look up or down rather than forward. And I don't really know why that is. I think, I don't know. There's a quote that I was thinking about where attention goes like follows, and I think maybe there's an element of that here too, where I'm like, I got you, girl. I'm going to give you some more. These are sort of similar things. That's sort of like a corner that I'm like, and I think they're both still not that, but they're just moments that maybe haven't gotten attention. And I think what's fun about these 2 is that, when you look, something draws you, and then when you keep going, you find sympathetic shapes that we were talking about, and you're like, oh, wow, it's so interesting when I look closer that these things, there's so much going on here that I wouldn't have known if I didn't look a bit closer. Okay, next. Oh, and then I also am playing with the many versions of me that are, I think I'd like to be able to add more play, which add a little cat in there, and I know it doesn't work, but that's the aim. And I love, these are 2 quotes. I was thinking about this Ben Norner one. basically the idea, live the question and everything, art and nature and so are you. And that's what, next slide, and that's it. I did it. Thank you.
I have a quick question for Sarah. You said where attention goes, life follows. Who said that?
I guess a few people. Ali Bogart is a yoga teacher who said that, but Mary Oliver also said a version of that.
Ryan, you're very soft-spoken. Is there something you're trying to say with your pictures and have the observer pick up from your portrait, your picture?
I think I kind of figure out what I want to say as I make the painting. So it's not like I have something I want to declare to the world that has motivated me to be a painter. You know, it's kind of the other way around. Like, oh, I want to be a painter. I enjoy making the painting. And then as we make the paintings, I've made quite a few of them. And as you make them, you realize that you're saying the same thing over and over again. And then it's like you have to give artists help to figure out what those things are. And then obviously to condense that to like a sentence feels bad, right? This is the thing I'm trying to say. I think there's subjects and exploring, and emotions, and I have certain experiences. I think my paintings are distinctly American. I don't know why, because I grew up in America. I like American painters. But so, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Also for Ryan, so I heard you say one of your inspirations, dreams a lot, and use that as inspiration. Do you do that as well?
Yeah, so Boris Best often would work from dreams. He kept a dream diary next to his bed. And apparently, I think my understanding is that he saw the paintings, verbatim in his mind. And he's a really interesting artist, and I recommend those who would be interested. But I think we need to look into him further. I should also mention that both of those artists, Boris Best and Ignis Martin, had pretty severe mental health problems, especially towards the end of their life. As for myself, occasionally I can come in a dream, but that doesn't really, maybe twice in my life, and it's great when it does. But I think I mentioned before that I feel like I'm working out most of my compositions, and sometimes I feel like my headspace is very blurry. That's how other people feel.
I have a question for you, Sarah. I was wondering generally what sizes your work are, and also could you speak more to like your art making process?
Yeah, they tend to be smaller, which I'm like, I'd love to work bigger, but those boards are like 9 by 12-ish. So that's sort of what they tend to be. And then if you build them lengthwise, those are the counts. So I guess that's 24. The process is, well, Ron and I were talking about this the other day, how like sometimes you start painting and you're like, do I know how to paint? Because I feel like the process changes almost often. But I don't know, sometimes I kind of go in with color. Okay, I'll answer it two ways. One, so when I worked with Marcia, she was like, never draw. You just sort of like place color and shapes until the form emerges. I find that to be much harder. So often what I'll do is sort of like paint draw, and then I try to build a canvas and then build up. But then with watercolor, it's a bit different because you can't really build, or I don't like to build up so much. I like to leave the paper and the immediacy of it. So that's just a lot of drawing, which is easier than painting, I think.
Ryan, if you would talk about your process, do that.
I tend to work on paintings for a while. I feel like I'm pretty reactionary, maybe. So like I have to have something to react to. So the beginning it doesn't really matter a lot for me. Sometimes I'll just so I have to conceive something, and then I work on top of it. And if I just do that, my paintings all kind of look kind of the same, because I'll end up at the same place. So then I normally have to make some sort of strategy to disrupt this thing. So it's either like an imaginary role that I can then implement, or an imaginary problem that I can then make up a solution for, some of which are like, in this painting, you're not allowed to use these tubes of paint that you can use them too much, or you have to compress the value range to sometimes in more mental roles, like this is a painting that has to be about some short story or something like that. Kind of just keep that role in mind and kind of slam my head into the painting.
Question for Sarah. Well, you mentioned your attempts in performing art. I think I wonder like how do you think, is there any like connection between the performing art and your painting part of art? Like, did you ever think about how they can be going together, or is there any like connection that may be made, like a what's it called, ready-made installation in your house or something like that?
Yeah, totally. The short answer is I don't really know yet. I think my job party was the closest I've probably gotten to that, where I got to merge these two ideas together. And I think that what was nice about that too is that I also got to integrate, because my work as a software engineer. And so that was like, I made a website using that skill. I used the skill of visual art to sort of like set up and curate a show. And then also the performance and comedy was part of the show and the writing. When it comes to adding that performance aspect to the act of painting, I don't know yet, but I'd love to figure it out, because part of the thing about performing is that it's like the most joyful, insane feeling. And I feel like I get a version of that when I'm really present with the work. But I don't know how to merge them yet. Would love to talk about it if you have ideas.
Thank you.